Hello and welcome to another episode of DCU Daily. And today we're talking about Superman Legacy and specifically about the castings behind the camera that are happening. So I don't know if you want to call them casting, more just hirings. James Gunn is going about finishing up and rounding out the crew that he's going to be working with. And the two people we're going to be talking about today are longtime collaborators with James Gunn who have worked on several of his recent and, some of his older movies as well. And as do a lot of directors, it looks like James Gunn is into the idea of sticking with the same people that he trusts and likes to work with. He's actually mentioned that several times on social that, you know, much like some of the actors that he continues to work with on multiple projects, like Nathan Fillion, for example, he shows up in a lot of his movies. He has a preference to work with the same kind of folks behind the scenes. So the cinematographer and composer would not be exceptions to that. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what that means for Superman Legacy, and then we'll also dive into that JJ Abrams produced Superman movie that's still in production. We'll go over some of the details about when the movie's set, what direction it will be taking, and whether it will be part of the DCU or not. I'm sure if you're very familiar with James Gunn's social media, then you probably already know the answers to some of those questions. But we'll also dive into potentially, the whether that movie as currently constructed, or as far as what we know about it, if it's going to be a success like the Batman franchise has been so far, or and the Joker franchise, or it will be one of those Elseworld stories that they do a one movie, it kind of sucks and doesn't really draw a lot of box office, and then they just move on to something new. Of course, JJ Abrams huge deal with Warner Brothers that was set in place when AT&T was still running Warner Brothers was basically slashed and dashed and mostly thrown out the door and in the trash can by David Zaslav over the past year. So J.J. Abrams' footprint at Warner Brothers is much smaller these days, and the two DC projects he's been working on are that noir Batman animated series where he's collaborating with Bruce Timm and Matt Reeves, and then the other one is, it seems like, the J.J. Abrams. Well, I just mentioned J.J. Abrams. The other is the Superman movie that he's working on, but led by a black actor in the role of Superman. So between those two projects, we'll see like what is going on. And to start things off, I want to introduce John, as always, on the show with me today. You're going to give us all the insights on both Superman Legacy as well as the J.J. Abrams movie. So how are you doing? How's your day been?
Pretty good. Usually Superman Legacy always tickles my fancy. I know it's the, go-to in terms of the most information, but, it's the next film, it's the first film on the docket, so and it's going to hopefully start filming in March as promised. So, we always like to see that. But yeah, the two big names, well, big one bigger than the other, I think. The most recent addition to the Superman Legacy crew, not cast but crew, is John Murphy. Famous composer John Murphy worked with mainly Guy Ritchie and Danny Boyle. He famously worked on the first installment of the 28 Days Later franchise, in 28 Days Later, as well as its sequel 28 Weeks Later, in the most famous song of that being In the House in a Heartbeat, which is this, really epic, raw, horrific sort of score and song. And so it's definitely an interesting choice for a Superman film. Um, I don't really remember his score for the Suicide Squad or Guardians 3. I remember it being a little bit more orchestral rather than like the more synth of his earlier scores, from what little I remember. And he's extremely talented. So, like, I think he could definitely bring out a very different vibe for this Superman, not just copy what came before. Like, John Williams was heavy on the brass for his iconic Superman score. Um, One of the most beloved, scores ever made. I mean, John Williams kind of just cranks him out like it's nothing. And then with the Hans Zimmer score for Man of Steel, very heavy on percussion. So it's definitely interesting where John Murphy is going to take it. And I think like he could definitely, come up with something more like of a raw feel for this version of Superman who's like gonna be who's from what we know of the film, it's definitely going to be he's going to be a very human portrayal, and he is trying to get more in touch with that Krypton heritage. So kind of learning more about like the alienness of him. I think like John Murphy can definitely bring in that sort of maybe epicness, I guess, from Krypton, as well as that human element of Clark Kent, Superman. So I think he could work at every facet. I think like he can make everything work. He's definitely multi-talented and can make anything work. So John Murphy is definitely an exciting addition. I'm curious. Obviously, he wouldn't be my first choice, but I think with what he has accomplished in his very long career, I think he's definitely a great addition. And then the other, this was announced a couple weeks ago, I believe, late January. Um, Henry Braham. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he is going to be the DP, director of photography, or the cinematographer. And again, similarly with John Murphy, he has worked with James Gunn in the past. He worked with him on the Suicide Squad. He worked with him on Guardians 3. But in addition to that, he also worked on another previous DC film with The Flash, directed by Andy Muschietti, who's obviously going to go on to do Brave and the Bold. And then he also worked with WB way long ago with Legend of Tarzan with Margot Robbie, another DC mainstay. So that's definitely and again, all these films, they all looked great. They all I think Henry Brom definitely has like kind of like a more surreal tone to his work. A lot of with the Flash. I think he with the Flash, Guardians 2, which he also did, Guardians 3, and the Suicide Squad. It definitely has like a lot of like intriguing, out there, surreal imagery. And I feel like if there is flashbacks to Krypton, which there might be, I think that he could definitely bring in that sort of like very like off-worldly tone that he definitely brought to volume 2 and volume 3, because even though volume 3 is probably the weakest of the Guardians films in my opinion, still very good. Definitely a lot of like intriguing elements with that, mainly with like the flashbacks and that kind of thing. Volume 2 is still one of, if not the best looking MCU movie, period, in my opinion. Guardians 2 is my favorite MCU film, if nobody knows that, but and I think that just that movie, just the scenes on Ego the Living Planet are just beautiful. And even what we see here with the opening scene with the race, who I am forgetting the name of right now, but the race of Adam Warlock. Um, but yeah, the scenes on that planet definitely really cool looking. He definitely makes those colors pop. He definitely makes just everything seem more surreal, and that definitely helped for the Flash, for better or for worse. I would say worse, but everyone's has entitled to their opinion on the Flash. But it definitely obviously VFX heavy, so it's kind of hard to tell what he actually brought practically as a cinematographer to that. But like I think what he did, like he definitely had like a cool vibe. I remember the night scenes looking kind of cool. It definitely felt reminiscent of uh the Flash TV series, the original Flash TV series way back in the 90s with John Wesley Shipp, how that was kind of, coming from like the Tim Burton Batman movies. I mean, Danny Elfman did the score, so with his longtime collaborator, I think Shelley Walker is her name, Shirley Walker. If I'm getting that wrong, feel free to correct me. But yeah, so it definitely brought in like that sort of like stark nighttime vibe that the original Flashbot brought in. So I feel like both of these guys are extremely talented in their own ways. I definitely think we'll get a different and rather unique Superman film. Well, at least we can only hope. And I think like bringing in a lot of that talent certainly helps. And I think Braham and Murphy are definitely. I'm more excited about what Murphy brings to the table, because like mainly because it's obviously going to look great. Like, I feel like James Gunn has a lot of passion for what he does and wants to make sure that he's making the best film possible, and it looks great. All of his films have looked fantastic. So that I feel like that's kind of like a surefire thing. It just with John Williams Superman score, that's mighty big shoes to fill. And even then, Hans Zimmer, I think, filled those shoes properly, but with a very different score, with that epic, grandiose, like percussionist score, I think was very well done. So John Murphy not only has one set of shoes to fill with John Williams with how classic that score is, but we also have, the Hans Zimmer score, which it was like right up there. I would definitely say right up there with John Williams. It's not as classic, obviously, but it is as it real like the score of those films, Man of Steel, but also BVS, of course. But if we're talking about just Superman films, Man of Steel definitely made it feel a lot better, than it was. And I feel like John Murphy can bring that talent, but obviously we'll see. And I definitely want to see what vibe he definitely goes for here from the both of them. But Murphy, I'm very curious about. I'm really intrigued with what he does with this character.
Yeah, I think between the two hires, you've got, two people like I mentioned earlier who have worked with James Gunn so many times before. And like John Murphy worked on one of his early films, Snatch. Like he's been a very long time collaborator with James Gunn. And of course, but the both of them worked with him on the Suicide Squad and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And Henry Bram even was the cinematographer for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which you mentioned. So they're familiar with working on this size and scale. I would say that even though they worked on the Suicide Squad, which James Gunn said was like, this is the biggest movie he has ever done in terms of just the scope and the amount of stuff they did practically, just the size of the sets and everything and the size of the cast. I still think in terms of high profile, consequential, and even budget and just the amount of attention it's going to get, because not only is it a Superman movie, but it's the first movie in this new universe. Both of these people are going to be entering these high pressure environments where even if they have worked with James Gunn before, I think this is every part of this movie is under a microscope. So, like you said, they've got big shoes to fill, especially I think even more so on the music side. Because a lot of people will, the thing is, most average people don't necessarily credit the cinematographer for when the movie looks good or bad, like visually. They'll point to the director because they're more likely to know who the director is than they are to know
Right.
who the cinematographer is. And whether it's fair or not, that that's usually what happens. But people do go out and, especially there's a lot of people out there who are fans of just, movie soundtracks. They will go and find the soundtrack, but wow, before the movie is even out. Sometimes the soundtrack is released a few days early or maybe a few weeks early. Some pieces of the soundtrack are released early, especially if they were used in the trailers. And even after the movie comes out, people look at the soundtrack, and in the case of Superman, like you said, the heritage of Superman movie scores is probably unparalleled in terms of franchises, like even more so than the Batman, despite the fact that we have gotten like twice as many iterations of Batman and they've got, uniquely identifiable scores. Superman is equally, but in most cases, I think most people agree that's original John Williams Superman score is probably the most iconic superhero movie score of all time. And then when you add into that what Hans Zimmer did to modernize the character after they largely used a similar version of what John Williams did and modeled after his work for Superman Returns, they went in a completely new direction for Man of Steel and for a whole new generation. Like they look back at Man of Steel and how poignant that score was. I think it was great for the movie that it was made for, and it hasn't gotten dated at all. I think today both of those scores. The good thing about both Man of Steel and Superman, the 1978 Superman with Christopher Reeve, the score for both of those movies, they have certain similarities once they kind of like pick up, but like you said, like the instrumentation is different. And largely, even despite some minor similarities in terms of like how the directors and the composers use the music within the movie, in certain points in the journey of the character, when you hear how they sound, the two scores are very different. They're both, I would like to say, uh, you know, identifiably Superman, but they're both very different scores from each other. And that's something where I think even Spider-Man, like he was, probably like if you go by what Google says in recent years, he is the most popular superhero of all time. Most people don't necessarily remember the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man score. There's some people do, but like I don't think they would look at it in
I
the
would say
same
people
category.
remembers the I would say a lot of people don't remember the Andrew Garfield score.
There
People
the
just
first
really
because the thing was in that movie, both movies had a completely different sound. Like, 'cause,
yeah, but I would
Hans
say
Zimmer did the
Danny
second movie,
Elfman definitely
you know?
created a great score for the Tobey
Yeah.
Maguire movies. I mean, Danny Elfman did Batman, The Flash, and Spider-Man flawlessly. Like, say what you will about Danny Elfman, but that man made 2 supremely iconic superhero scores. Yeah, they don't match up to Superman, but hell, I would say both of them are fantastic. And I would say The Flash from 1990 is definitely an underrated score, even though it was
Right.
kind of just a leftover track from Batman '89, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, I mean, even like, yeah, the thing is with whether, I mean, Elfman was kind of in a tough situation with the Justice League when they brought him in for that theatrical release with Joss Whedon, but yeah, I think he's still doing great work. I mean, I forget if he's doing I don't know if he's doing the score for the new Beetlejuice movie or not, but he's still out there doing his thing. And in recent years, Warner Brothers has sort of kind of gone out and gone. Hans Zimmer hasn't been doing a ton of these. I mean, he's worked on Oppenheimer. He's working on other movies with some collaborators that he's worked with many times over the years, like Christopher Nolan. But in the superhero genre on the Warner Brothers side, we have kind of, Rupert Gregson Williams did a bunch of stuff in the DCEU, including the Wonder Woman scores. And they've kind of Junkie XL, or what's his Scott Hulkenberg, or maybe I'm mispronouncing his real name, but he used to go by Junkie XL. Um, which they collaborated on for the BVS score, and then he took over for the Justice League, especially the Snyder Cut version. Which
Yeah.
I personally liked it. It just went really hard. Like it was orchestral, like it was very hardcore orchestral music.
Yeah,
It was
like
very Zack
orchestral
Snyder.
rock almost.
Yeah, exactly. It was very Zack Snyder. I get that, and then it matches the filmmaker's vibe, and he had the freedom. So and I think Junkie XL's style fit what Zack Snyder was looking for. But
Yeah.
I think with James Gunn, the one thing that I worry about a little bit is none of the at least for me, none of those Guardians of the Galaxy scores, and neither the and the Suicide Squad score, they don't really stand out. I mean, there's one theme in the original Guardians of the Galaxy movie, the first one, the one where that they use as like the theme of the Guardians when especially when they're coming to the rescue in the third act, and like the whole ship is about to like destroy Xandar, and like all of a sudden Nova Corps is coming together and they're defending Xandar. They play this like heroic triumphant theme. I think that was the only theme out of all three of the
Yeah.
Guardians movies that truly stuck with me over the years. And the Suicide Squad just didn't have anything. I mean, there were some good songs on the soundtrack, but as far as the score
I think
goes,
that's the main
you
thing. The
know?
problem with kind of James Gunn's score is that he mainly borrows from pop culture. Like he borrows a lot of rock songs, like the rock songs from his youth. So we remember those movies not for the scores, but for the songs. So
Right.
we remember, Redbone. We remember what was another really good song? Uh
I mean, I remember Purple Lamborghini. Well, actually, that wasn't his Suicide Squad. Never mind. That's
um but
the
yeah,
other
like a
one.
lot of like those the pop culture
I
songs. So
mean,
and I
yeah,
feel
the
like
first
with
Guardians of the Galaxy has one of the best soundtracks, like in terms of
oh
just the
yeah,
song, like the songs. Yeah.
you have
Period.
like Fleetwood Mac, you have Redbone, you have all these really great some one hit wonders, some like classic. And I think Brandy was another one, the song Brandy. And I think just like it those that's what those are remembered for, like the songs. And I feel like with this, we will see more of a score than songs. And it all depends, but I feel like with Superman, it's like there's less of a expectation, like he's a guy who listens to like pop culture hits. I'm sure there's gonna be like some like songs in there because that is kind of James Gunn's trademark a little bit. So I think there'll be something there, but I feel like that Superman Legacy is going to be more score heavy, and so we're not really sure what to expect, which adds kind of to the whole curiosity of it. Is like, how far is he going to go with like those rock songs that he loves to put in? Is it going to be not as much? Is it going to be too much? We'll see. But I feel like with those scores, we're definitely I feel like we're going to see more of John Murphy's talent there, because I just feel that it's going to be more score heavy than song heavy. I just feel like with what we've gotten in the past with Superman, James Gunn knows that. James Gunn is a lot of things, good, bad, depending on the person. He's not an idiot. I don't think he's an
Right.
idiot. So, and I feel like he is going to bring this guy he's worked with before, however, but also has a lot of talent making one of the most iconic themes for a horror movie ever. So I feel like he's definitely, John Murphy has done that before. James Gunn knows that. James Gunn knows that Superman is a guy that doesn't rely too heavily on, pop culture hits. It's going to be about the score, and I think James Gunn is going to go more so full force with that than doing what he's done in the past. I feel like Superman Legacy is just going to be the big curious step for James Gunn, because I feel like this is probably the most different out of all of his films, like, because he's done a lot of, like, comedy driven stuff in the past, even like other films he's done, like Slither and Super, which were, not his bread and butter that everyone knows him from. But he, this is definitely a step in a new direction for him, and I feel like he's gonna, depending on how he's gonna work it, if it's a great film, it'll definitely show that, okay, he's not just this, comedy action guy or comedy horror guy. He can do something that has like a lot of, I mean, all of his movies have a passion, but like this will be like almost like a different kind of passion. I think he's aware of
Yeah.
that, and I feel like we're getting just like a lot of uncharted stuff with this, and it's definitely exciting, worrisome maybe, but exciting for how far we're gonna go getting all this new stuff from him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, by the way, I wanna correct myself. I think I kept saying Snatch was a James Gunn movie. It wasn't. It's a Guy Ritchie movie, so I just wanna make sure somebody's watching
Yeah,
long enough to
I was
like
gonna
that. I'll
say,
correct my but
yeah,
nonetheless, I
you're
mean,
good.
yeah, the point you're making some good points there because ultimately that is both concerning and also refreshing that they're gonna have to go in this different direction because, like you said, he's aware enough to know that there is this legacy, no pun
Eh,
intended, of Superman having these iconic scores to work for him. The one thing that I do wonder of, I mean, speaking of, the John Williams score, in recent years, Warner Brothers has sort of like gone back and forth between the idea of like, for example, like in DC fandoms, they were using the John Williams theme all the time. In that theatrical version of Justice League, they basically Danny Elfman tried to mash it in somehow while also using the Man of Steel score, parts from that score, and then bringing his original Batman score in because he didn't want to maybe use some of the pieces from BVS. So there was like a whole, all kinds. It was a completely messy situation. And then the Zack Snyder version of the Justice League went in a completely different direction, almost ignored all those scores, and then created something completely original for that
exactly.
film alone. So but largely it seems like in recent years Warner Brothers has had a tendency to sort of harken back to that classic Superman, where they want to like lean on that John Williams score, and because of how iconic it is, they're like, it's almost like an if it ain't broken, don't fix it approach. So like I wonder, and then feel free to let me know what you think about this. I wonder if John Murphy will look at that score and say, if I can get John Williams' blessing, maybe I can just build off of it. Or would he go in a direction that maybe what Michael Giacchino did, where he sort of picked out elements of the Hans Zimmer Batman score from the Dark Knight trilogy, the Danny Elfman Batman scores from the 90s and 80s and 90s, and then he came up with something that was kind of a combination of those two things, but also very much felt like a Michael Giacchino
Yeah,
score. It has a lot of the instrumentation that he loves to work with, whether he sees Mission Impossible movies or anything he's done with Marvel. You can tell that Michael Giacchino put his own uniquely identifiable like spin on the Batman score to, and ultimately
oh
what we
yeah,
got in the Batman is something that we've never really heard before in a Batman movie. Do you think John Murphy has that in him? Is he gonna do something like that where he's gonna maybe
I think
borrow
so.
from those past scores and go in a different direction? Or is he gonna like try to just let's just do another John Williams-esque thing and we're just sort of doing, or maybe we're just even taking that score and building on it, so you're hearing that same theme music?
I think John Murphy just I think his instrumentation is just so different from John Williams. I feel like he's heavy kind of into that like synth sort of thing from what scores I've heard from him. And I feel like he might not necessarily, I think he'll like obviously do something more orchestral than what was what he's done in the past. And I think he will do something, I think he'll borrow, not borrow, but like, yeah, take elements from what worked and then just do his own thing. I think because the Batman was just so supremely excellent that, I mean, the score is easily the best part of that movie. So I feel like John Murphy has it definitely has the talent to be like, okay, yeah, we have something that's, we have, okay, we have so much. Oh, what's well, I get I don't really can't think of a word, like, we have so much, like, history in regards to this character, and but John Murphy is like, "Okay, I've done some great shit in the past. Let me just combine the epicness of those 2 things, my talent and the talent of maybe even John Williams and Hans Zimmer, but and just come up with, like, what Michael Giacchino did for the Batman, but with for Superman." And I think that's also really exciting because I'm like, "Michael Giacchino, that's an interesting." 'Cause me personally, I thought Michael Giacchino would fit better for a Superman score because I feel like he's very light with his films, not all the time, but usually his films have like a lighter, like sort of like brisk
Yeah,
feel to
he
it, and I
uses a
feel
lot of percussive instruments in his, you
yeah, and
know,
I feel like he has like
tracks,
sort of
yeah.
like a light, like a air in the like into it.
Yeah.
But like I was so shocked with how like I didn't doubt the man because the man I would go so far he is easily the best modern film composer we have currently in the industry easily. So I wasn't surprised he still gave us excellence. But after I listened to that entire score over the last couple days for the Batman, and I'm like, Mike, you okay, man? Because this is like, I feel like you went to some dark places to create something like this in a good way, maybe a bad way. I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope the man is okay. We love you. Don't make
Well, I
sure the
mean,
man's okay. But
he did direct Werewolf by Night for the MCU, so you know
yeah,
he's
I
got
mean, the
some
man is
darkness in
so
him.
talented. Like
So,
Werewolf by Night was considered like one of the best things Marvel's done in like years. So it's like, all right, the man
yeah,
can also direct because of course he can.
of course he can.
So, so I think John Murphy, I think for the opposite, because I mean, when you look at it, when I was saying Michael Giacchino, sort of kind of like a lighter feel, like sort of like a triumphant, heroic thing, and then he does something so like hardened and raw, like the Batman. John Murphy could be the opposite. Has done something a lot of like raw, dark scores, like for 28 Days Later, for Sunshine. Sunshine was an excellent score, but then Superman, like being that sort of that brighter character, I feel like he could have that rawness, but in sort of like more of a human way rather than like a nihilistic way, like sort of like a brighter human way. And I feel like John Murphy could also go in that direction as well because I feel like again, man's supremely talented. He's done like so much great work in the past. I feel like kind of the opposite of Michael Giacchino going against what he's done, but what he does differently, I think he could do something really cool. I think he could do something really good.
Yeah, it's look, I personally, if I was in James Gunn's position, I would have like said, okay, this is Superman, right? As and but like obviously he trusts them enough because it's John Murphy. He's worked on two superhero movies, both at Warner Bros. And Disney, so there's a relationship there. But if I was a producer, I would have at least like if I was Peter Safran, let's say, and maybe he did, like maybe he did mention to James Gunn that hey, maybe you want to, this is the superhero movie. This is not just a superhero movie. This is the superhero movie that you're going to be working on. Perhaps the most high profile project of your entire career, which may, which could go on for decades more, but this may yet be the biggest thing you do for a long, long time. why not go for like you said, Michael Giacchino? I think Michael Giacchino and Ludwig Göransson are probably, when you look at that young crop, the newer rising crop. I mean, you can maybe not call them rising because they're already kind of there, but as part like that non, like if you come out of the maybe let's say the Michael Giacchino and Ludwig Göransson are the two of the best composers today who weren't working in the 90s, because like Hans Zimmer goes all like the Lion King and stuff, like he
Right.
has iconic stuff that goes decades back, much like John Williams and Danny Elfman. But like I think between those two, obviously the Batman's got already Michael Giacchino. I would have loved to see Ludwig Göransson. Like he's done a lot of stuff over at Disney, and he has done stuff with other studios too, but I'm like, Ludwig Göransson has that innovative portfolio where you're like, he can come up with something that is uniquely tied into with the motifs that he creates to the character that he's working with. Whether it's the Mandalorian, instantly iconic and classic, Black Panther, instantly iconic and classic, and yet between the two of them, you'd be like, you can't really swap them out and pretend that they fit the other character, like the shoe doesn't fit.
Right.
That's the kind of that's the kind of iconic score that Danny Elfman created for the Batman in the 80s. That's the kind of iconic score that John Williams created for Superman in the 70s. You just can't imagine another superhero with that score, because literally that Superman theme with John Williams Superman theme is like super, like it goes in and it's like Superman. It's like literally built into the theme. It spells out Superman for you. And I feel like if there was one critique, I would say somebody like a Ludwig Göransson for something this big and important might have been a better fit. But then again, like if he's worked with John Murphy, James Gunn has worked with John Murphy on two previous movies that were both like nine-figure budget, big studio tentpole superhero movies. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, and then just moving back over to the to the cinematographer side, Henry Braham, like he's, so the relationship between a cinematographer and director is very synergetic. Like there has to be a synergy there. It's almost like when a good cinematographer and director have conversations, and they have such a good shorthand that like one person starts a sentence and the other one person finishes it. That's the kind of relationship, and then that's something that just doesn't happen overnight. You kind of develop it over the course of multiple movies, and if it ain't working out, then you kind of move on to the next collaborator. So I feel like there I'm much more comfortable. I don't really mind what Henry Braham has done before, because if he's worked with James Gunn on multiple projects before, that means that they have a relationship where they can immediately click. And I think that that's really what matters ultimately. On the composer side, I guess it will come down to like, let's see how iconic this new Superman score, which would be the third uh, new iteration of a Superman score, at least cinematically, that we will see over the history of Superman on screen. So, yeah, I'm interested to see how that plays out. But before we finish up today, I did want to kind of switch gears and let's just talk about JJ Abrams for a bit, right? Like JJ Abrams
Yes.
has been working with Warner Brothers for a number of years now. He signed this deal, which was at a mega deal at the time with Bad Robot, where they were gonna, I think, they almost had like a $500 million or something,
I think
and
so.
they were
Something
gonna be
like that.
involved in everything with HBO. They were producing shows, movies, and then they had then David the Discovery buys Warner Brothers from AT&T. David Zaslav and his team comes in, and they say, well, we're gonna try to like not spend money, create like there's no end to it, and like they're like, money is not printed on trees, or money does not grow on trees, printed on trees. That would be interesting. And they started to throw out a bunch of these projects that JJ Abrams are working on, including this high profile show that he kept on pitching and had been developing for years, and it was going to be this sci-fi show. I forget the name of it, but it was gonna be like a Game of Thrones-esque show, but the budget would have been insane. Like the per episode budgets would have been insane, and like a per season commitment of almost like $200 million, which is a lot. Like that's like most movies, even most tentpole movies, don't have a $200 million budget unless you're like a big Marvel movie, or like if you're like an overblown, like if you're a Fast and Furious movie and Vin Diesel wants to pay everybody on the cast $30 million. So they threw that out. They were like, "Yeah, we're not doing this." They even took that Batman noir animated show and said, "We're not putting this on HBO." They sold it off to Amazon Prime, so they're not really, Warner Brothers isn't really taking on liability from a financial standpoint there. and then they kind of cut off a lot of the other stuff, like the Justice League Dark, that at some point he was developing. That's out the door at this
Yeah.
point. So the only real project, I mean, outside of that Batman Noir animated show, the only live action project that JJ Abrams still has active at Warner Brothers, especially regarding DC, is that Superman movie that he had been developing with Ta-Nehisi Coates writing the script. Something that has been that was announced. I don't even know at this point how long ago was that. Like what, 2017 or something? Like how long ago was it? Because
Something like that. I
like
think it was 2019, so about 5 years ago.
because I feel like that
Um,
happened before the pandemic, right? Like it was like, oh yeah, they're working on scripts, they're delivering drafts, and like we were getting a bunch of updates, and then
yeah,
things just sort of like died
it was
down.
Justice League Dark was one of them, as you mentioned, because the other
Yeah,
2 shows were, because I'm looking at it right now, is Duster, which I don't know what that's about, and then Overlook, which was the Shining prequel. So he was developing all that, and I think there was also like a reference that there was going to be like a Zatanna show or movie, and
I
something
do
like
remember
that.
that. Yeah,
Something like involving Justice League Dark. I think there was like going to be like a Constantine thing, something like that. But yeah, there was like oh, he was going to work on a bunch of, work on a bunch of like more like supernatural horror stuff, which makes sense because that's kind of where he got his start. So that they were going to go like for that angle, and then it just kind of never became anything, and we just kind of dwindled out. But outside of that, is this Superman film that's going to be written by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he's producing it. I don't believe he's directing it. I think he's just producing it, and that's kind of it. Um, and I feel like um it's something. That's really the best I can say. I just feel like it's one of those cases where it can work, but I feel like with the writer and his track record, it feels like it's one of those movies where it's going to be message first and quality storytelling later. And that is really, I feel like that's really just not the way to go at this point, because I feel like audiences are kind of getting sick of that. Um, if you want to make a Superman movie and he just so happens to be like the Val Zod or Calvin Ellis incarnation, or even an entirely new incarnation, then awesome, great. But I feel like if you're just making Clark Kent black just to have him be black is just, I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of lazy a little bit, and you're not really giving, a character to someone, to people who want to see that representation, because I feel like any group deserves, a proper representation on screen. Of course, we all want to see that, like proper great characters, and I feel like, we got that with Black Panther. That was such a, great example, and that's a character that's been like that for years. And I feel like if they kind of just go with message first and, quality later, I feel like that's just not the way to go. And I feel like people just deserve, better than, sloppy seconds from these other characters that were so iconic, and then you swap them for, just to like fill a quota. I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me. But I mean, they could definitely make it work. I mean, JJ Abrams has worked on some good stuff in the past. He's kind of, wonky now because of how Rise of Skywalker was, and he's kind of laying low right now, kind of just working behind the scenes and just kind of doing that. I don't want to automatically write this off. Like, I don't want to, I'm not David Zaslav. I don't just write things off willy-nilly. So, I want to believe in this. I want to say, hey, this is definitely going to be great, because I want it to be great. I want every movie to be the greatest movie ever made. That's just the type of person I am, and I want this to be good. I feel like
yeah.
there's a story to tell here. I know Michael B. Jordan was also interested in getting a Val Zod movie off the ground, because he agreed, like, if you swap this character in terms of his race, then you're gonna alienate a huge group of people, not in like the most extreme way, obviously, but it's just like we see this character, we love this character, we know who this character is. Let's give another somebody else a chance, not necessarily Clark Kent, but this other guy who like is kind of niche and not really known, and make him known. We did that for Miles Morales. Look at Into the
Right. Yeah.
Spider-Verse.
Yeah. That's a
I
good
mean,
example. Yeah.
that's such a great example because Miles Morales, when he was first introduced, was kind of like a character that was just kind of weird and awkward. Not a lot of ton of people liked him. He had his fans, but I feel like just the way Brian Michael Bendis wrote him, it was just kind of not great. And then he kind of, grew over time and all that. He kind of became his own character rather than Peter Parker Light. And then with Into the Spider-Verse, essentially rebuilding the character from the ground up, because there was a great video essay on this, how the MCU version borrowed ironically so much from Miles's stories. He's like, okay, well, we have this guy who's ironically Peter Parker, who's borrowing a lot from Miles. Well, let's rebuild this guy since they borrowed so much. Let's just do whatever we need to do. And Into the Spider-Verse is beloved. Like everybody loves that movie. Across Spider-Verse, I think a lot of people
Yeah.
were pissed that that was a big cliffhanger part one, even though it was mentioned part one in the marketing, but that's beside the point. But
I mean, it
and
made
then
twice
Miles
as much
Morales.
money as the first one,
Yeah,
so,
like,
clearly people
it's
went to
making more
go
money.
see it.
People are excited because I know that there was like a lot of divisiveness about the cliffhanger. So people were pissed about that. Which, like,
Yeah.
if you weren't aware that it was a part one, I'd be kind of pissed too. But I knew it was going to be part
Right.
one. So when we got to be
Yeah, the
continued,
same
I
thing
was like,
with
oh
Dune,
yeah,
I
of course,
think.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I remember being in the theater and a lot of people were like screaming, like being like,
No, like,
"What?
we're
What are you talking about? What do you mean to
yes.
be continued?"
Yeah.
So like if you do something like that, if you do something like Miles Morales and just be like, okay, let's tell this story of someone who isn't Clark Kent. Maybe it's one who's been established. Like I believe Calvin Ellis is the one that's being showcased here, and just do that. Like I know it's hard because the Clark Kent Superman is so iconic. He's been around for over 80 years. The like everybody knows like that crest, even in that picture, yeah, it's slightly different. It's silver, not yellow or gold or whatever. Is that the Batman symbol are two of the most like iconic logos ever. So it's hard because some corporations don't want to rebuild an IP, even though it is kind of technically the same because it is Superman, just a different version of Superman. But I feel like just have a little bit of patience. I know you want to make money. I know you want to just like immediately make $1 billion at the box office. I know it's all a business. I get that. But sometimes you got to build that a little bit. And if you build that, we will get a Superman who just so happens to be black as someone who can be just as iconic as Clark Kent Superman. If you just give him that little bit of patience, if you just make the movie good, just write it well, just direct it well, and just put all the passion you can into it just to make a good story that just so happens to have a black Superman, you're going to be printing money like nobody's business. You're going to be printing money, I guarantee it, if you just don't like be like if you aren't lazy with it. If you aren't lazy with it, just really go in, get a director who's passionate about it, get like just all the talent you can. Just you got to be patient, got to let the fan love build, and if you fail, well then you could try again later on. It's going to take time, but again, patience is key. Patience is key. I feel like
Yeah.
that's the main thing to
I
draw
agree
from
with
that.
you. I think, look, ultimately, when I looked at this update, James Gunn mentioned that this is going to be, like, I think this was like earlier this year or late last year in one of his social. He responds to all kinds of questions on social, which is great that he's willing to do that and keep fans updated and you give them these like small updates every once in a while. And he mentioned that of course this is not going to be part of the mainline DCU. It's going to be an
Yep.
Elseworlds project. So
Yep.
that's something we have sort of assumed even back when the DCEU was around. But on top of that, he mentioned that this movie is going to take place like in the 20th century. It's going to be like a period piece almost, right? Now,
Yeah,
the 20th century, they could just mean, it's 1980s. Like, so maybe the era that Christopher Reeve Superman was around. Or they could mean 1920s, like like post World War One or something like
yeah,
that, pre World War Two, or you might be getting into the Cold War era, like it could be like around the time of the Civil Rights Movement. Like there's a lot of interesting moments in the 20th century that you can pick from and say this is where this particular character exists in the world that we're going to tackle. And I think that to me is very interesting to try that because it puts Superman in a very different world than
yeah,
we've ever seen him before. Because especially if you go pre like 1980s and 70s, where Christopher Reeve Superman, like we kind of know what Superman looks like in that era. But if you kind of move him back into the more of the period piece, even beyond that, yes, that'd be interesting. And then look, any version of a Black Superman, I think, would have created certain like interesting storytelling points that you can explore, whether it was just Clark Kent, except he was in black, and that's what the Kents had to raise in the Midwest, and how that changes things because he probably went to those schools where there weren't many other African American, or like in this case black students, because like he's technically not African American, he's an alien, but like there's not a lot of other students with his skin color and complexion. So that would have already created like a different kind of like how he grew up would have been different, how he sees himself in the world would have looked different just by default. But when you have a lot of that, like you said, with Miles Morales, you have a lot of that comic book heritage with those two other versions of Superman who are black, and they have these stories built around them that you can pull from, whether it's Calvin Ellis or Val Zod. You can turn that into something very uniquely different, and then maybe even build an entire franchise around it. Like it doesn't have to be a one-off. And I think when you have that comic book material to dig into and pull from, then why not do it? Because I think personally that would be more interesting. Like I agree with you. I think rather than just having two versions of Clark Kent on screen, I know we have many versions of Bruce Wayne on screen, but I think Batman is uniquely, it's singularly different in that sense because it's Batman. It's DC Comics, Detective Comics. Batman is the character that he's DC's the house that Batman built. So that's different. And Batman will always have that, despite the fact that they say Superman is the superhero that the biggest superhero in DC. I'm like, let's be honest. Like it's Batman. It's always been Batman. It always will be Batman. So that's different. But when it comes to all these other characters, I think it would be I think they did this in the Flash TV show, and it worked for when they only had brief cameo appearances from the older Flash. And what's the name of the Jay Garrick Flash, right? Um,
yeah,
when they kept bringing him in for cameos was fine, but then where it started to like get murky, and all of a sudden like like what is going on here is like when he just became a normal part of the show, and all of a sudden you had two characters with so much overlap, even though one of them was much older in that particular iteration. Then obviously the Flash where it really went off the rails is when everybody was a speedster, right? So I think we've seen other situations where it doesn't always work out that you have two versions of the same character running around at the same time, and admittedly with distinguishable differences, but still people don't always react well. Like I said, Batman is an exception. Even with Peter Parker, like they did that one movie. And right now there's rumors that Sony and Marvel are having some creative differences over Spider-Man 4 because Sony wants to kind of do another, No Way Home where they bring back Tobey Maguire and Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker and Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker to help assist Tom Holland's Peter Parker with some other adventure. Whereas Marvel wants to, and Marvel and apparently Tom Holland as well, want to kind of start small with something unique and more of a street level Spider-Man, which is what they kind of built up to towards the end of the last film. So I get that. Like there's definitely different perspectives on it, but I think if they were to do what Sony wants to do, apparently, I think that'd be the wrong decision. You do that once and you make that feel special, that everything that happened with the three Spider-Man in that one go, and then you leave it there. Like maybe you bring back Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire into the Spider Verse movies that they're making. Which at one point apparently in Madam Web, Andrew Garfield was being considered to be brought back, which would have been interesting. I think they cut all that stuff out, but yeah, I think as far as having this JJ Abrams Superman movie in the first place. When they announced it 4 or 5 years ago at this point, I was intrigued because I just thought like, like what let's just see how it does. Like let's just give it a shot. Like what's the worst that can happen? You're not gonna like the movie. Great. Like then we move on. If it bombs, they're not gonna make another sequel. Like it is what it is. But now 5 years later, with so much that has happened, the whole reset of the DC universe, and granted there's room for an Elseworlds movie like this to still exist.
Mhm.
I just wonder that after going through 5 years of development hell, if it's actually ever gonna get made, because
Yeah,
we haven't,
exactly.
like, beyond what James Gunn has said, which isn't much. I mean, it gives us some sense of direction, but it's not something that is entirely groundbreaking. Like, oh yeah, it's going to take place a period piece taking place in the 20th century. It's an Elseworlds movie. A lot of people sort of assumed that they were going to try to differentiate in those ways, but we really haven't heard any more talent be attached to this. JJ Abrams, for all we know, is only producing this project. He's not directing. We've had a writer attached for years. I don't even know if Ta-Nehisi Coates is still actively working on it, or if he submitted a draft and they've kind of called it a final draft and just left it there. So when they say developing, I'm like, what are they developing? Like, are they on the 20th draft of the script developing? Are they trying to find a director developing? Are they trying to find an actor? Because usually when movies have been in development for this long, if you're gonna take the next step, that means you're gonna package this thing up, and then you either sell the idea, or in terms of a studio film, you get to production. Like you get an approval, you get a budget, and you get rolling. And I just don't know what's going on here, because there's no actors attached, there's no directors attached. They don't seem to be hiring any a crew. They haven't really got anybody attached to these outside of the two people we already mentioned. So I mean, what's your opinion on this? Like, do you think this is going to be one of those projects like Constantine 2, the sequel that Keanu Reeves was attached to, which got announced, then seemingly got canceled, but then it was back online. But now it seems like it's done for, like that Batman Beyond thing that never came to pass because Keaton's future with the franchise kind of went up in smoke. Do you feel like it's going to be one of those instances where eventually they're just going to say it's not happening anymore, or do you really think they're going to like see this thing through? Like, and if they do, like, how, like, who would you even have direct it? Like, where do you go with this?
Um, I think it's just I think, like, at this point, like, just kinda lay it to rest. I think what the reason why maybe James Gunn is saying, "Okay, yeah, this is happening," is to kind of sort of battle it out with the Batman, which is the only other real Elseworld story involving such a yeah, we have Joker, but, like, I feel
Yeah.
like after Full ADU, that's not happening because I have a strong feeling that both Joaquin Phoenix and Todd Phillips won't be coming back after that, even if it is a success. So I feel like okay, they're bringing. So what Superman projects do we have? We have this one that's been in development hell for 5 years. Okay, let's say that this is still happening because the Batman is this big Elseworld story that was hugely successful. So I think they're just trying to recreate that, but with Superman. And and they're doing something, like, so different, which while the Batman is, like, grounded, gothic kind of feel to it, this is just so different because it's not even, the mainline Superman. Um, I mean, if I were to get anyone to direct, I think it would be Michael B. Jordan now that he has this experience with directing with, Creed 3. And he did say he was interested at one point in starring in it or at least producing it, and I think he would be the right choice because he understands what the fans would wanna see, and I feel like he gets he gets the fans, like, we don't wanna be, like, alienated or chopped off or chopped down because we're like, "Okay, they're doing this, why? Why are they doing this? Are they doing it because they wanna tell the story, or are they doing it because, well, that's the thing now, let's race swap a character because reasons." So, I feel like he gets that, he gets the fans, and I think he would bring something interesting because he did have a lot of anime influence on Creed 3. Like a lot of the fight scenes in that movie were very like anime driven, and I feel like a lot of the fight scenes in this could also bring that sort of like very surreal concept that anime brings, but in live action. and done well, unlike most live action animated anime adaptations. So I feel like he could bring something like kind of interesting like that and also star in it, because I think he's a very talented actor, and I think it'd be kind of cool to not have a Superman that's like super huge, like kind of more along the lines of like the Brandon Routh uh
Yeah.
Superman in
Although, like,
mainly
but
from
Mike, if
2006.
like,
But
if Michael B. Jordan's gonna be in it, he's gonna bulk up. Like, we've seen
he
him,
is
like,
gonna
he
bulk
can
up, but
pull off the
I would
physique.
love to see a
So,
more like athletic, like toned Superman, like
yeah.
someone who's kind of like I kind of like how Tyler Hoechlin is kind of smaller, because it just
Mhm.
makes him look that much more powerful. Because like when you see a big Superman like David Cornsweet, that dude is fucking huge now. That man like grew like 3 sizes. Like he is the Grinch's heart as a person. That man grew 3 sizes that day. It didn't take a day, but you know what I mean. And I like how Tyler Hoechlin looks in terms of like this smaller Superman. Like you don't think he's going to be a threat, especially with someone as Superman who like believes in like the good of people and like innately good
He's
person.
a very amicable Superman. Like, he's a
Yeah,
very
like he's
approachable
like
Superman, like,
yeah,
that's
like
what
exactly, which makes him
yeah,
good for Clark Kent, because it's like
right.
it's kind of like it's reminiscent of, don't get me wrong, I love the art, like I love the story, but like Superman for All Seasons, how like Tim Sale had like a lot of over exaggerated art, but it is comic book, it's artistry, like it's fun to see. But like when you have like someone that's like the best comparison I give is like My Adventures with Superman, who's like this gigantic behemoth of a guy. It's like, yeah, that guy is clearly Superman. Like, not like saying that's a bad thing. That's a different way of like interpreting the character, and I like that. I think it would be really awesome to go the opposite direction, like what Tyler Hoechlin's doing, where he's this smaller guy, where you don't think he's going to deliver that much, but he can, because he has so much power and all that. And I think it would be kind of cool if like Michael B. Jordan. I don't think he's like small or anything, but I don't. He's not The
Yeah,
Rock,
he
and I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like
yeah,
that would be
yeah,
like a
he's not like
cool. I like that
yes.
more
Yeah.
athletic tone to Superman. Like, oh, this guy, this small guy, he's not going to be that huge a threat. He's not, Atlas. He's not this huge guy, but then he is. Like, he has this experience. He has this, this power, and I think that would be like really awesome to see. Just, again, my sort of 2 cents on the look of Superman, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting too because, like, then when you tie that together with the setting of it being a 20th century film, Superman as a character, it's always kinda hard to write Superman as a character because you're trying to find, like, like way to antagonize this person because you're gonna build a story, so there's gonna be conflict. So how do you find a villain that works for Superman because this guy is, like, practically invincible? So, I feel like if they were to do this, I mean, maybe they depower him a little bit because especially if you're like, because I feel like if they're doing it in the 20th century, I think, like, the prime spot would be the Civil War civil not Civil War, but, like, the civil rights movement. Like, Superman exists within that realm, and if you can imagine like, how that kinda changes things up, or the fact that he's, like, a black man who's got all this power. I mean, in Batman versus Superman, it was all about the politics were like played up quite a lot about how one man with so much power, how that affects the world order, especially when he acts unilaterally without consulting the governments of the world where he's operating. Imagine that, but now it's a black man with that much power, especially at the height in the mid 20th century when racial tensions were way high. I mean, I'm not saying they're not up there today, but we just from that historical like lens, I feel like that would be there's a lot of good storytelling potential, but at the same time, I wonder. I'm like, like a lot of superheroes today, that a lot of super villains, I should say, that we have seen fight along opposite Superman. They're either aliens or they're using some kind of advanced tech, and so unless they go the alien route, I don't know how advanced the tech would be for Superman, like, that exists in the mid 20th century. Like, how like, can it really do anything to I mean, they may have to, like, kinda do an alternate history angle on it potentially, um, because even in the 70s and 80s when, that's where I think they kinda ran into some trouble too with with Christopher Reeve Superman, I think the latter movies really couldn't provide like a proper conflict that would be suitable to the power set and of Superman. Like I think then they started to maybe lean a little more in towards Clark Kent as a person, but people are going to see a Superman movie to see Superman. They're not, I mean, as much as we like to see Clark Kent kind of, be the alter ego, that's the one part that I would be interested in seeing because I think that's where the right challenge is from a writing perspective. Like, who becomes this antagonist and most likely the antagonist can't be somebody who's going to be matching fist to cuffs with Superman. You're maybe looking for something maybe that's more of a little bit more ideological. But when you get ideological, you sort of nullify a lot of what Superman stands and a lot of Superman's power set has to, do with his ability to be this invincible human being or just,
Right.
alien. Um, Otherwise, you're just talking about maybe Superman taking on militaries, like entire militaries, not just a singular person, but militaries. So that is the thing that would be like intriguing to me, not maybe concerning, but intriguing to me. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions. I personally think like what you said, if this was still 2021 and maybe the pandemic didn't happen and this was 2 years in and they were just about to like start hiring a director and then getting an actor and then you move on and then you just package it up and there you go, here's you got a budget and now you're rolling cameras, great. But the fact that it's been sitting there for 5 years and the most significant update we have got from James Gunn is basically telling us a lot of what we already knew and not attaching any new talent to the project, that's not a good sign. It may be just that they're keeping this alive until they find something else that is a better, fit for that Elseworlds banner. That to me seems like this is a project that's not quite active, but it still exists. That's maybe what
Yeah.
they mean by it's still in development. Because like I said, I can't imagine 5 years later, I'm sure Ta-Nehisi Coates stopped working on it during the writer's strikes, but he didn't have to stop working on it while the pandemic was happening. So, like what kind of script like takes 5 years to polish up to the point that you need to then go get a director? Plus, in most instances, directors come in and they're gonna like tweak the script. So like there's no point in like going through so much because that script is not going to be the final version until you have a director attached. And JJ Abrams just seems to be in no rush to direct this movie. So yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of like, factors that point towards this movie eventually getting shelved. But guys, let us know in the comments what you think. If this is a movie that you would like to see one day, the JJ Abrams Superman movie that's gonna feature Black Superman, whether it's Val Zod or Calvin Ellis, or maybe even just a Black Clark Kent, is that a movie, especially being set as a period piece in the 20th century? Is this something that intrigues you? Is this an idea that you still like to see come to life, or at this point are you're just saying, hey, look, we're relaunching this new DCU, let's just focus on Superman Legacy and everything that's to come after, and let's move in that direction, and then just we can have other Elseworlds opportunities because I'm sure there's so many other characters that may not be a good fit for the DCU that they can just develop into projects that could have the Elseworlds banner. So let us know in the comments what you think about that. If you have any ideas, leave those in the live chat while we're live, and then of course afterwards leave it in the comments below. Like and subscribe. That helps us, get all friendly and nice with the algorithm, and the algorithm promotes us, and that helps us do more of these each and every day. But up until tomorrow, when we'll be back at it again, it's been nice talking to you, John, and I hope everybody, if you're watching, go out there and watch something DC related, and then come back here and talk to us about it. We're more than happy to discuss it with you. And until next time, it's been great talking to you.